Well, thank you everyone for coming today to the 12th anniversary of the National Apology for Forced Adoptions. My name's Chris Mundy. I work for Neighbourhood Centres Queensland, but before I was working for Neighbourhood Centres Queensland, I was working for Jigsaw Queensland in the Forced Adoption Support Service. And so have been a part of the adoption community for many years now. And it is a real community, I think. It's all about, people who are affected by forced adoption coming together and hearing one another's experiences and supporting one another through the difficult times. I was adopted in 1973. My mother was sent to St Mary's Home over at Toowong. And I've had the privilege of meeting both my mother and my father. And it's made a huge difference to my life and my identity. And in fact, some people may ask about the flat cap and what's the deal with that? Well, when I first met my father 12 years ago, I met him and he had this real baldy head and wore a flat cap. And so on the first birthday that I was able to celebrate with him, I was 39 years old. And his gift to me was a flat cap. And so I've been wearing it ever since because it's finding your identity and where you belong and fit, isn't it? And it's really interesting, like they say that 1 in 10 people are affected by adoption in Australia. And just when I had a chat with my team at Neighbourhood Centres Queensland and about kind of, their background and things like that. We have a team of around 8 staff members, mostly part-time. 3 of those people have been directly impacted by forced adoption, either adoptees or their parents were adoptees. And just so many out in the community affected by forced adoption. But there's such a lack of awareness around it, isn't there? So that's a little bit about me and my background. I would like to also welcome everyone here to the 12th anniversary of the Forced Adoption Apology, but also extend a welcome to those who are watching today's event via the live webcast. The webcast is being recorded, and in the unlikely event that technical issues arise, it will be available to view later today using the same link. Toilets are just outside and to the left-hand side down the hallway. Just follow the directions of Jigsaw Queensland staff, and just make sure your mobile phones are turned off or on silent. Well, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which this event is taking place, the Turrbal and Yuggera people. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. We'd also like to acknowledge and thank all the people who advocated over many years for the reality and impacts of forced adoption to be revealed. The ones who contributed so much to supporting those affected and who, through their efforts, gained a national apology for forced adoptions. Without you, this day would not be happening. Thank you to the Australian Government, Department of Social Services for funding this event. And today we'd also like to welcome some important people who have come along to this event. Claire Moore, who was a former Senator and Deputy Chair of the 2012 Inquiry into Forced Adoption Policies and Practices. One of the outcomes of the inquiry was the National Apology for Forced Adoptions in March 2013 and funding for forced adoption support services in each state. The Honourable Amanda Cam, Minister for Families, Seniors, Disability Services and Minister for Child Safety and Prevention of Domestic and Family Violence. Corinne McMillan, Member for Mansfield and Shadow Minister for Child Safety, Communities and the Prevention of Domestic and Family Violence. And last but certainly not least, Jigsaw Queensland past President and past CEO, Dr. Trevor Jordan. Thank you to Kerri Saint and Judy Glover from the Association of Adoptees as well. Vivian Timmermans from You Gave Me a Voice, Rhonda Grant from Alas, Australia, Colleen Bernard from Origins, and the Jigsaw Queensland team for planning this event. We will now light candles to acknowledge those who have worked so hard to gain the apologies for forced adoption, and all those family, friends and others who have supported them. I'd like to now invite the following people to come forward and light a candle. Firstly, Kerri Saint from the Association for Adoptees. Rhonda Grant from Alas, Australia. Colleen Bernard from Origins. Vivian Timmermans from You Gave Me a Voice. And Heather Herman for Jigsaw Queensland.
And unfortunately, mine's not working.
We now have a presentation to Dr. Trevor Jordan, but I'd like to ask Collette Glazebrook to come up and say a few words. Thanks, Collette.
It's nice to see everybody here today. You know, Trevor and I were in Canberra 12 years ago, representing Jigsaw as part of the apology. However, as life would have it, on the morning of the apology, Trevor was given medical advice to fly home immediately and check in with his regular doctor. So this meant Trevor wasn't physically present at the apology, but he was certainly there in spirit. The emotion of worrying about Trevor's health and the depth of the meaning of the apology can never be forgotten. And I'm sure every one of us in this room and beyond have our own memory of the 12th of March 2013. Another unforgettable event for me came from the life-changing impact of holding a birth relative for the very first time, even if it was a big bear hug with my brother Trevor. It's no wonder when a little down the track from that moment, brother Trevor phoned to say, "Would you like to come and volunteer at Jigsaw with me?" And that was 27 years ago. Unbelievable. Trevor had just accepted the role of Jigsaw president, and from that day forward, he remained completely dedicated to building a strong and durable Jigsaw team of volunteers and workers, and indeed to offer his skills, that are many, knowledge and support to adoption communities in Australia and overseas. Trevor, there's so many memorable moments. I don't know how to condense it, but I have. Numerous meetings, both formal and informal, including decades of being a facilitator or a co-facilitator of one of our support group meetings, being part of various consultation groups, engaging with other agencies and adoption groups. And let's not forget, just being there for any individual who approached you, who needed to hear their voices to be heard and their stories to be heard. Your natural ability to diplomatically and clearly propose options to changes in legislation. You were always open to listen, always offering different perspectives, never giving up. And how often later down the track, I'd recognise your hand in the writing of any new directive. Generally, after a government meeting, we'd all head for a coffee and a bit of a download. After all, we have lived experiences and triggers do happen, as we know, and we found laughter and sharing and talking it out the best medicine for all of us. Of course, I too will never forget those who've been before us, especially with Jigsaw about to turn 50. I find it breathtakingly difficult to ever forget the level of commitment and personal energy required to get the laws changed so that we could have access to identifying information in 1991-92. Thank you, a heartfelt thank you, to everybody involved. Federal funding as part of the apology understood the need to provide ongoing support services, and it made it possible for Jigsaw to greatly expand and to open our doors 5 days a week. Hence the existence of forced adoption services, as we call FAS, as we know it, becoming part of Jigsaw. This fulfilled one of our continuous dreams, and that was to be available to provide services, help and support for as many people as possible in our adoption community. Today I remain an active member of our Jigsaw Management Committee, and Trevor has finally made the move to retirement. That's his version anyway, is what I'd say. And if you can imagine a fishing line in there somewhere, he's a mad fisherman. However, from the groundswell of calls through our Queensland adoption community to recognise your dedication, that's why I'm here today to present an award to you, Trevor. You and your work have done what you've done for so many individuals, organisations and governments has not gone unnoticed. Before I continue, I'd like to ask Heather to come up with me and be by my side. There are many stories of long-term commitment in Jigsaw, isn't there? Heather was there from the very first day I joined 27 years ago, and I often think of Trevor, Heather and myself as the three musketeers of Jigsaw. We've been there so long. I know we vividly remember the challenges of our little organisation. Along with many of the people in the room, you've all been having similar things with your own organisations. I know Heather and I are so very proud to present an award to you today, wherever it is.
It's on the table, but it's heavy.
All right. I should read what the inscription says. With our deepest appreciation, we proudly present this award to you, Dr. Trevor Jordan, in recognition of your unwavering passion, commitment and dedicated service to the adoption community. Your invaluable contributions have made a lasting impact. Thank you. Is that beautiful?
That's for you, Trevor.
Well deserved.
Don't.
Do you want me to take it for you?
Yeah, and we'll put it back in. And we'll let you do your bit.
Few words for you.
Thank you very much. I'm lucky I go to physio to be able to hold that heavy object. Thanks, sis.
You're welcome.
Look, I really appreciate this. Never did anything to anticipate anything like this. I guess I did it because adoption came into my life, and you lose a lot of yourself in adoption. My first self I lost when I was born. After a few days, I lost myself and identity. Then I lost my identity when I was 23 and become a father when I was told I was adopted because I hadn't been told. And then I lost another self when the government refused to give me information about my origins. And then I lost myself again when my sister was given information about her father, and information was refused to me. And I remember ringing the minister's office. I've dealt with so many ministers. There's 5 at that stage, I think, but Phil Reeves was in, and I rang the office and said, I've only felt illegitimate one time in my life, and that is today, when you refused me something that was given to my sister. But I am here and continued on to do what I did using whatever skills I had, because I didn't work alone. I worked with the support of people around me, and I'm so glad that you people are here today. And I've always said, we all do our own thing. We let all the flowers bloom. We don't try to be the same. And the world of adoption in the future, it's still going. We don't need a basket of flowers. We need buds on a tree. And that's what we have still here. We have people still going with the buds and the change that's needed to bring change to adoption. And I have to say this, that we've achieved so much in those years from where we started, where when I first came, I had no rights to information, then right to non-identifying information, and then right to some information. And we've got so much now that other people around the world envy us. But there's still work to be done with our colleagues, our friends who are out there who are donor conceived. They face the same struggles that we do. And they face an industry that exploits emotions, that provides some hope and benefit to families and creates them, but also exploits identity, keeps secrets that can sometimes be lethal. So I hope that everything we've achieved, that we can stand in solidarity with donor-conceived people and bring changes in Queensland to make access to information and openness and honesty the policy of the day. And to do that, all you need is to provide a helping hand. Yes, it's going to be tough for people. Some people it won't like it. It'll create problems in their families. But if there are people and services there to help, then they can get through that. That they're not left alone to deal with those things. And that's what government is there for, to help provide the services to a diverse community with different needs so that we get a helping hand. So enough of that. I am retired, it won't seem like it having said that. I do say no to just about everything now. One of my things I did was I used to say yes to everything. Now I do say no. And thank you for this, it was unexpected. And I'll cherish it. And most of all, I cherish the memories and the relationships. I previously, many years ago, quoted a Jackson Browne lyric that I want to live in the world, not inside my head. And I want to stand and be counted with the hopeful and the willing and the open and the strong. And that's what you people are. And that's why anything that I've achieved, we've achieved together. So thank you, everybody. Thank you. I might need your hand to get going.
All right, darling.
Collette, before you go, a huge thank you from us.
Thank you, Collette and Trevor. I'd now like to invite the President of Jigsaw Queensland, Jo Sparrow, to come up and make an introduction. Thanks, Jo.
Thank you, Chris, and good morning, everybody. It's an honour and deeply personal privilege to introduce our guest speaker today. Before I do, though, I'd like to share a little piece of my own adoption story for context, something that I don't often do publicly or privately. And I hope you'll bear with me as I take the long, winding road to get to my destination. I was 23 days shy of my 29th birthday when I gave birth to my first child, a son that we named Matthew. My journey to motherhood was not easy. It was filled with heartache, including 2 traumatic miscarriages and years of infertility. My adoptive mother and sister, who is 18 years older than me and also an adoptive mother, gently suggested that perhaps I might consider adoption. My reaction was visceral, a hard, unwavering no. At the time, I couldn't quite understand why the suggestion struck such a deep and painful chord. Despite having spent nearly a decade navigating an up and down reunion with my mother and a childhood filled with what I now recognise as the repercussions of trauma, I had deliberately avoided examining adoption's impact on me. I convinced myself that it hadn't left a mark. Fast forward to November 5th, 2000, when my son was born at the Mater Mothers Private Hospital. I'd specifically avoided the Royal Brisbane Women's Hospital, where I had been born and adopted, because something about those grounds felt unbearable. Matthew entered the world screaming, inconsolable for nearly an hour, despite having pethidine in his system. Something in me broke during that time. I felt shut down, panicked, like I'd made an enormous mistake, and that I was not fit to have a baby. After 6 days, we were sent home, despite my struggles with breastfeeding and a growing sense of fear about caring for him. Over the next few weeks, I slowly began to bond with Matthew, but my physical health deteriorated. My pain was dismissed by doctors until after one final, "I don't know, you'll be fine," I was rushed to the Princess Alexandra Hospital, vomiting green bile and in agony. I was diagnosed with life-threatening pancreatitis and spent the next 10 days in the hospital over Christmas without my baby. My husband took Matthew home as he wasn't permitted to stay if I wasn't breastfeeding. My adoptive family was away for the holidays. My biological mother and brother, who I'd only just again recently connected with, visited briefly. When they all left, I was alone in a hospital, and my baby had been taken from me, and everything fell apart. It was a breaking point, and if I wanted to avoid bleeding trauma onto my son, I knew I had to start peeling back the layers of my adoption experience. That journey led me to Jigsaw Queensland Adoptee Peer Support Group. Years later, while working at Jigsaw, I shared my story with a colleague. She asked me if I'd read Dr. Jenny Conrick's recent PhD research, Adopted Women as Mothers, through the filter of adoption experience. Jenny's work explores the largely overlooked experiences of adopted women stepping into motherhood. And I remember thinking how different things might have been if I'd had access to that knowledge back then. Jenny's research doesn't shy away from lifting the lid on the popular adoption narratives. She takes a critical, compassionate look at the lifelong ripple effects of adoption, not just for adoptees, but the generations that follow. If you'd like to hear more about her work, I had the privilege of interviewing her on the Adopt Perspective podcast on July 20th, 2022. My now 24-year-old beautiful son, Matthew, composed and plays the music that is the theme music used on Adopt Perspective. But enough about me. Let me introduce the remarkable woman herself. Dr. Jenny Conrick is a social worker with over 40 years' experience as a clinician and manager in child and family welfare and health. As I mentioned, her PhD thesis focused on the adult adoption experience, a vital, often neglected area of study. Jenny is a lecturer and postdoctoral researcher in the Social Work Department at the University of Melbourne, where she leads a project exploring direct-to-consumer DNA testing for those with an adoption or out-of-home care experience. She also runs a small private clinical practice and holds memberships with the Australian Association of Social Workers and the Australian Association for Infant Mental Health. She's a Vera Scantlebury Brown Scholar and holds an impressive range of qualifications, including a PhD and Master of Social Work from Monash University. But beyond the credentials, Jenny is an extraordinary human being, compassionate, insightful, and courageous in her commitment to amplifying the voices of those affected by adoption. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Jenny Conrick.
Well, I must say, I was just saying, I've started to cry and I haven't even started. I'm sorry about that. Okay, excuse me. So, good morning, everyone, and thank you to Jo and to Helen and to Jigsaw Queensland for giving me this opportunity, thank you, today on the anniversary of the 12th National Apology for Forced Adoption and Practices. Excuse me. I would like also to acknowledge the Turrbal and Yagara peoples who have been the custodians of these lands on which we're meeting for thousands of years. They've looked after the land and waterways, and they've had their own ways of caring for family and for healing past hurts. And they still do that today. And I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and to any First Nations person who's with us today in the room or online. I would also like to acknowledge the thousands of people across Australia, in this room and online, who have been subject to past adoption practices. Those who were separated from their mothers and fathers and grew up not knowing their family and community of origin. And I would like to acknowledge mothers who experienced the loss of sharing their children's lives and experienced the grief of disempowerment and the shame of separation. Yes. So I'd like to acknowledge the fathers who were excluded from the lives of their children and deprived of the dignity of recognition on their children's birth records, and for the extended family members who have often been hidden. And many of these words you'll recognise from the apology itself. In many ways, I'm an outsider to the adoption community. I'm not an adopted person, as far as I know, nor am I a mother separated from a child, and I'm not an adopted parent. And as you've been told, I'm a social worker by profession. And what I know and what I've learned about adoption over the years is through the generosity of those who have shared their journey with me. They've been my teachers, and the enduring impact of their adoption on their lives has been something that I hope I'm an ally with. I thought I would start by sharing two small anecdotes and then move into the general address. In my final undergraduate year at university, which was 1974, one of my fellow students became pregnant, and her friends, we were devastated. We thought, what is she going to do? Can she complete her studies? What's going to be the future? She's inevitably going to be separated from her child, and that's going to be a terrible thing. But it was 1974, and the Supporting Mothers benefit had come in a year or so beforehand. And as the time drew closer for her child to be delivered, she made the decision, supported by her family, that she would keep her child. And that's what she did. And I believe he's now almost 50. So we know, so that's the first very big impact that story had on me, and that's been very different to many mothers who I've spoken to. And I'm thinking of someone whose child was born a decade before my student colleague, and she had no choice in the matter, and her son is now almost 60, and they still don't have contact. I have a very dear friend who is an adopted person, and she's a number of years older than me, and she was born in in the 50s, early 50s, and had a good enough adoption. She knew, though, that her and her adoptive parents didn't quite fit. She was given all sorts of privileges, and she said she had a good life, but it just wasn't quite right. Years later, she searched and found her mother, and they had 30 years of contact before her mother died. But again, my friend said, we didn't fit either. We did on some levels, but there'd been too many years that had passed and we didn't fit. And throughout this journey, my friend was trying to sort out just where she fitted, who she was, what were all of those parts of her that made up the person I knew. She then, of course, went on to find her father. She wanted to find her father. However, she searched all the records. She went overseas in search of him, and there was no such person that she could find. So the records and, I guess, her mother's account were not as accurate as she'd hoped. 8 years ago, she used DNA, and after a time, she did find a relative. She found a brother, a half-brother, who she had no idea about, and she found out about her father and the family he'd subsequently created. Her father had died. But in those experiences, I've seen her move through ups and downs, the roller coaster of parts of her life. And she said she now feels at this point in her life that she's at peace. She knows who she is, and she has a marvellous relationship with her brother, who had no idea he had a sister. And my friend's children and grandchildren feel quite blessed to have him in their lives. So I guess those two small accounts are just two of the 250-odd thousand adoptions that have occurred in Australia in that forced adoption period. And for every child who is adopted, there are two parents, and there are aunties and uncles, and there may be brothers and sisters, and then there are children and grandchildren. And so forced adoption is not just about that 250, many, I imagine, who are in this room, but it's about the broader rippled family relationships. What we know about the impact of this period has come through the bravery of those who've had an adoption experience, being willing and generous enough to share your stories. You've shared your stories through the national inquiry, the Senate inquiry, which you know about, that led to the apology. Many of you would have shared your stories with the Australian Institute of Family Studies and their work. Many people have shared their stories as well with researchers like me, and also with international researchers. And these tell us about what it means to have an adoption experience at a very deep level, but that they're only scratching the surface, really. There's so much more to know. So some adoptees, of course, adopted people have, like my friend, had a good enough experience. It was not too bad. But then through my private practice, which is within the adoption community, I hear many other stories. People who were absolutely not included, people who had extremely painful experiences. But whether an adoption was good enough, there's nevertheless significant trauma and loss through separation from their mother and placement as infants with strangers. And what we're now learning through neurobiology and epigenetics is that these early experiences can have impacts on the infant that we sometimes think can't speak to us, but they do, and they keep it within themselves, within their bodies. Many adopted people, as they grew through childhood, adolescence and early adulthood, report feelings of feeling different in their early lives. having to navigate questions and comments about being adopted, who they didn't look like, but hearing who their perhaps their parents' natural sisters may have looked like, but they didn't. There can be challenges in self-esteem, challenges in trust, challenges in forming a solid identity that allows people to move confidently forward. In young adulthood, there can be issues in navigating romantic relationships and intimacy. Questions can arise about whether to have children and how adoption may influence parenting, as Jo has shared with us through her story. And then it's always that anxiety about what are you passing on to your own children. Adopted people, like mothers and fathers, and I'll be speaking about some of their experiences in a moment, often are keen to access adoption records and then perhaps search for birth family. And this can be a time of great anticipation and hope, but it can also be a journey with outcomes that are unexpected and impacts that can take quite a time to get over, really. I'm increasingly interested and surprised in my private practice over the last 2 years about the number of people in their 50s, 60s and 70s and even in their 80s who are either discovering for the first time that they have an adoption experience, or they're finally making a connection between their adoption and their lifetime of anxieties, catastrophising, hypervigilance, and always seeking external validation. They may not have severe mental health issues. However, a lifetime of these uncertainties have a significant negative outcome for people in mid and later life. Being separated from a child through adoption has a profound and lasting impact on parents across the various stages of their life. As many of you here will know, there's the initial trauma of the separation and all that went around that, and I'm not going to go into that. You know what that was like. And then I think often the lack of opportunity at that point to unpack what had happened, to discuss and to have it verified and acknowledged. And all of that was part of the social, I guess, expectations of the time, but that leaves its mark. And I think the many mothers will have a burden of secrecy and of regret and of shame related to those earlier experiences. Mothers are also, in the midst of this emotional burden, are confronted with decisions throughout their lives. They have to decide when they partner, do they tell their partner? What do they tell them? Do they tell their children that they may subsequently have, and what do they tell them, and when do they tell them? Do they tell extended family members, and what do extended family members know? And what's going to happen when the secret is out? And they're very big decisions. Many mothers I've spoken to want to access records to find their children, and this is a really push-pull situation. They want to access them because they have thought about those children every day of their lives, and they want to know if they've done well and what's happened to them, and they want, hopefully, to be reunited with them. But they also know, deep inside, that time has passed and they don't know what reception they'll receive. They don't know if they will be blamed for what happened, and there can be lots of trepidation about that decision. And so many women take that path, and some reunions work well, some don't. So it's a very individual experience, but there are common themes. For fathers of adopted persons, there can be at times a late revelation of having a child. And this can turn fathers' worlds upside down they never suspected. They then can feel angry at never having been told, not necessarily with the woman who has had their child, but with family members and society. They can feel unsure that this is the truth, and how are they going to confirm it when nothing is in the records? They might then choose to do a search, but before they do that, they then have to make decisions as well. What do I tell my partner, if they're partnered? What do I tell my children? And how do I manage the fallout from that? So there are these, and sometimes it's fathers in their 40s and 50s who are making these discoveries. And then they search, and then they need to incorporate perhaps another child into the family that upsets the balance and causes a readjustment. It doesn't have to end badly, but it's always a time of transition and of challenge. And then, of course, we have who I call the invisible family members, the siblings and other relatives of adopted people and of parents, and what they wonder about. I've been touched by hearing your stories this morning about the impact of finding siblings, and we all know through literature and many of us through our own experiences how important siblings are. Siblings often outlive our parents, and who else holds some of those childhood memories but siblings? But with adoption, that doesn't happen. Not with siblings who are connected through birth. And then, of course, as Jo has mentioned, and others have mentioned, there are children of adopted people and other children of natural parents, and they also have a journey as they come to understand their heritage. This is very brief, in a way. So, the National Inquiry into Forced Adoption, as has been said in 2012, subsequently led to the apology, and that was delivered by Julia Gillard, and a great step forward. At the same year, the Australian Institute of Family Studies also published papers about the impacts of adoption, which, if you haven't read them, I would really encourage you to do. They're quite marvellous. And since the apology, as has already been said, there have been advances. There's the National Archives of Australia established the Forced Adoption History Project, which toured at least the southern parts of Australia in 2015. And there's the Online History Project, which I believe is still accessible. As has already been said too, additional funds have been provided, and that is marvellous, but that mustn't stop. It can't stop, because adoption doesn't stop with one generation, it moves down. In Victoria, there's now a redress scheme for mothers, and in Western Australia, compensation for mothers and adopted people is still under consideration. There have been online courses developed by the Australian Psychological Association, to help educate mental health practitioners and GPs and welfare practitioners, and there have recently been further training for those in aged care. So there's a real recognition that people are ageing, but that the impact doesn't necessarily cease. There have been amendments to adoption acts in various states, offering more broad access to information. And the Victorian amendment in 2013 enabled birth parents to receive identifying information about their adopted children. In 2017, the Legislative Review Committee looked at the Adoption Act and was really saying that there were a whole lot of recommendations that still needed to be acted on in Victoria. So, and there's many more odds and ends that are happening. But in spite of the changes of the last 12 years, and I take my hat off to all of you who have worked so hard for them, and there have been wonderful changes, there is still a way to go to recognise the continuing impacts of these experiences for individuals, their family, and for subsequent generations. There does need, I believe, to be a continuing education of policymakers and professionals. So not just those who are working on the ground, but policymakers need to hear this and understand that it is an absolutely real thing. And I say that while also acknowledging the strength that you provide to each other as you validate each other's experiences. That is so important and needs to continue. Minister Rishworth's comments a while ago to engage the Commonwealth and state governments in discussions about redress and reparation, while very complex and fraught, need to continue. There needs to be ongoing funding for counselling and support for multiple generations. There also, I believe, needs to be funding for consumer-led research about family members across the lifespan, about intergenerational issues, about siblings and the significance of those. I often think that there should be a national database of some sort that starts to capture the experience of people with an adoption experience across the lifespan. Nowhere do we record how many people with an adoption experience access our mental health services. Nowhere do we record the impacts on health across a lifespan of some of the experiences that you have had. Nowhere do we know how many people with an adoption or out-of-home care experience homelessness, financial insecurity, domestic violence, or how many people are entering the juvenile or adult correctional systems. I think we need to know this if we're to be responsible. I also think that there needs to be continuing advocacy, and you're doing it here, and I commend you, and I thank you for allowing allies that I hope, I see myself as an ally, can also work with you. And just as a final word, and it comes from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, fight for the things that you care about and do it in a way that will lead others to join you. And congratulations, everyone.
Thank you so much. That was incredible. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Jo.
Thank you, Jenny. That was fantastic. I'd like to invite Kerri Saint from the Association for Adoptees to come up.
Wow, this always happens. Every time I go up here, we've got to lower the speaker. All right, I did have to write some notes this year. Last year I didn't realise I was speaking. I was sitting over there thinking I was going to have a nice, comfy, relaxed day, and all of a sudden I looked at the sheet in front of me and I realised I had to make a speech. And so I had to wing it. So this time I'm not doing it this time. So let's see what happens. All right, I've written a song, well, I've started writing songs a couple of years ago because I realised that as victims of forced adoption that we needed songs to tell our story. And the first song that I ever wrote was A Crime Not Known. And it was interesting that the first time that it was played was the first time I actually cried at our events. That was the first time that I felt that these events were a part of my voice. I had been in survival mode for so long, telling my story and fighting for others, that I forgot that it was about me. So here today, I have a little tube of sand. I'm trying very hard not to shake up here. This little tube of sand is very integral to my story. After the Rain is a song that's been 62 years in the making, and has now been condensed into about 6 minutes. 6 minutes to tell my story. 6 minutes to share your story about the impact of forced adoption. In writing this song, I've used metaphors that hold very deep personal and painful meanings for me. But I also hope that the listeners will be able to easily translate these words into memories and meanings and experiences that apply to them. As adoptees, we face many struggles. Our enduring strength, resilience, perseverance to forge for the truth and belonging is a constant. Despite the traumas, trials and many difficulties we constantly face, though at times knocked down, we emerge from our place of solitude, safety or rest to rise again. This is the story of After the Rain. When babies are born, there is a general excitement and joy generated as mum, dad, family members and family and friends gather to celebrate together, welcoming a new, beautiful, treasured new member into the family. And within this excitement, the baby feels the love, safety and joy that radiates towards them. The sound of mum's familiar voice and heartbeat tells them that all is well in the world, they are safe and they are loved. However, for adoptees, this is not our beginning. This is not our story. For us as newborns, we're birthed into a storm called adoption, where the clouds of darkness envelop us. Though thrust into the light of life, we are carried away by strong winds called condemnation and judgment. Our hearts are drowned out under our raining tears called fear that no one dries. We are displaced by this raging storm, sent like refugees to shelter in a foreign land. We learn to adjust, to call it home, but always feel different. We are always strangers. Some of us manage to find a way to manoeuvre through the storm of adoption, adapting, harnessing, navigating, sheltering, but never feeling complete. While others struggle, drowning under overwhelming feelings and emotions, unable to speak, to express. Anger and resentment eat at our heart, never finding a way to shift the indescribable pain, grief and loss we feel. There are those of us who somehow summon the strength to endure, never allowing the storm of adoption to silence our voices. Battered and bruised from being tossed to and fro, we batten down the hatches and meet the storm ahead. In my hand, I hold the sand of my childhood from a place where I would hide from a storm of adoption and abuse. The sand is the foundation of this song. I held this sand in my hand when I recorded this song. As a child, I hid amongst the safety of the trees, with beautiful birds around me as my only confidant. I was free to dream of my mother and imagine who she was, and told myself that I would find her and the truth. The fact is that I was told that my mother died giving birth to me, was 16 and never wanted me. I later found out in my 20s that my mother was 34 years old, was a widow and had 4 children in her care. Prior to the federal apology, I was able to go back to that place, back to where all the traumatic, abusive memories originated from, and retrieve the sand from the very place that I hid as a child. The trees were gone, nothing was there but the sand where my tears had fallen. This small container of sand is to remind myself of the hopes and dreams I held on to as a small child. Never did I dream that this sand would be here with me today, or that it would inspire me to write this song. Our anniversary events remind me of my safe place, where no one can interfere with my truth, my thoughts, or my feelings about adoption. I talk freely about my adoption experience, without condemnation and without judgment. I can express my anger, my hurts, and my tears. I can openly share with those that know my journey, because it's yours too. Here I can let down my walls. I do not need to hide my pain and grief of being an adopted one. Here I am safe. I know I'm not alone, because I'm with those that have suffered with me. I wrote something in a blog not long after the federal apology, and I'd like to share it with you today. I now realise the power of truth, whether it is good or bad. Speaking my truth, no matter how painful, has helped me to reach deep down inside me to that little girl hiding in her secret place, shaking in fear and tears. Grabbing her hand, wiping her eyes, I tell her it's okay now. No one is going to hurt you anymore. You can now run and jump and play and be the little girl that you were meant to be. Your truth has set you free. I sit with her now in the open. I don't feel I need to hide her away anymore. No one's going to threaten to kill, beat, or lock you away just because you dared to speak your truth. When the day came that this country apologised, I carried this little girl on my shoulders. I didn't want her to miss a thing. When all was said and done, I sat her down before me as I poured out the sand of abuse and trauma on the ground at Parliament, both federally and state. It was then that we both knew that healing had begun and that I was truly grateful for the bravery of a small, frightened little girl who was determined to survive. So I'd like you to listen to this song as it speaks to your heart, not only about my journey, but yours. Thank you.
In the midst of a storm, our life is brought new.
you, Kerri. I'd now like to invite Donna Byrne to come up, and we've got a reflective exercise.
Thanks so much, Chris. Hi, my name's Donna. I'm a member of the Forced Adoption Support Service at Jigsaw Queensland, along with my colleagues Sarah and Simone. We're very privileged to have the opportunity to provide an art reflection activity at the event today. It's called the Tree of Hope. And while people are having morning tea and mingling, we'd invite everyone to come and paint a leaf onto the tree trunk that we have prepared over near the bar area. We have paints in a number of colours. You're invited to use your thumb or finger to paint a leaf on the tree. We chose a tree to represent our history and how we grow and develop over the years. The roots of trees aren't always visible, but they must be strong and spread out and seek nutrients from their environment. Sometimes in difficult environments, the roots have to travel a long way to find what they need to ensure that the tree grows. The tree trunk is strong and resilient and holds the tree up. Sometimes there are knots in the trunk. These can be visible imperfections, yet despite them, the trunk continues to grow over many years. The branches are offshoots of the tree trunk. Each branch has its own direction and power and reaches out to follow its path. The leaves of the trees are interconnected and provide shelter, shade, and beauty. All of us here today have different and unique life stories. If we use our unique fingerprint to provide a leaf for the tree, we are coming together to create something greater than we can create by ourselves. It is bigger than ourselves, and it not only commemorates the past, but helps us to grow together into the future. So I really hope you'll come out on a limb and join us in the Tree of Hope activity. Thank you.
Thanks, Donna. So just over morning tea, we can just move over to that lounge area over there, and we have a tree prepared where we can put our imprint. Sorry, what was that? Okay. Yeah, sure. Come on up, Kerri.
After I get over crying over my own song, I just want to make everybody aware that in these booklets, it'll lead you to Kerri St. Bandcamp, where you can actually download the 3 songs, including that one that I've created. You can listen to them for free, or you can purchase a song, or anything that's created goes back into these projects. It goes back to education and awareness. I just like to... So if you have a look through there, I think Jigsaw actually printed out some little flyers that actually has the information on it. So, yeah, just want to say that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kerri. Just going to have a brief time of just silent reflection, and I think there's an abridged version of the apology in the program there, and I think it's a really good thing to reflect on. Every time I read the apology, I get something different out of it, and so let's just have a short time of reflection. Well, thank you everyone for coming in person today, and for those who have joined us via webcast. The presentation will be available shortly after we end today's event. You'll be able to watch on demand by clicking on the same link that brought you to the live event here today. Continue to support one another as we join together over morning tea, share experiences with one another, Continue to support one another even after the event today. Continue to share your stories and experiences to create more understanding out in the community of the impacts of adoption. And continue to have conversations with government and other decision makers. We bring such a wealth of knowledge and experience with everything that we've been through, and we've got so much to share in this space, not only in the areas of adoption, but as Trevor mentioned, in the areas of donor conception and surrogacy and the impacts of that into the future. So we'll now move into some morning tea. Over that way is morning tea, and the reflection exercises over that way. So thank you everyone for attending today.
And I have just a really quick thank you to Chris for coming and once again emceeing this event for us, because he's the first person we try and lock in when we're organising these things, because he does such a wonderful job of it. And thank you again, Chris, for making yourself available. I know you're a very busy man.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well now...